Amen.
Thank you, brother.
Go.
Thank you. It is an absolute honor every time you get asked to speak. It is deeply humbling to just simply be trusted enough to talk to young people. I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad we have an opportunity to study together. A little concerned about the idea of an anchor. I've been in 2 boat wrecks in my life. I spent about an hour and a half floating on a cooler in the Tennessee River. I'm 5'4", deep water scares me. But I've been in 2 major boat wrecks. I did I spent 2 days in North Carolina doing an anchoring class, but we were on Looking Glass. If you've ever been in Brevard, North Carolina, the big gumdrop shaped rock is a big rock called Looking Glass, and we're putting in rock climbing anchors. A rock climbing anchor is there in case you fall. What we were building were called master points or power points. They're designed that if everything falls except the rock, that power point will hold you. Well, that's the same thing about a boat anchor. A boat anchor is designed to keep the ship or the vessel stable in one place. The problem is that in a storm, the rules for anchoring are different. If I bring my boat here and from the top of the stage to the floor is the depth of the water, I just drop my anchor there and tighten it up, and the scope of the rope is about that deep, and the anchor dredges into the sand, and my boat doesn't float away. It doesn't rock into rocks or obstacles. But if I know there's a storm coming, I want my boat anchor to be 5 to 7 times the depth of that water. Because if my boat anchor is too rigid, if it's not flexible, and the water's here, my boat is here, and the waves come up, if I can't ride that wave, it sinks my boat. If my boat anchor is too short and that wave pulls me up and pulls my anchor out, it can take me away from where I know I'm at and drop me somewhere in deeper water where my anchor won't even reach the ground. So when you begin to prepare your anchor, you've got to decide, am I preparing for calm water, what I'm sitting in now, or am I preparing for a future storm? There's a poster, and I don't know who painted it, but it shows a samurai with part of his armor. He's got his helmet off, but he's wearing his sword, and he's tending flowers. And there's a little student there, and the samurai tells the student, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. Now, what does that mean? That's about preparation. See, if you're not prepared for a worst-case scenario, if you're the gardener and you end up over here where you have to go to war, that's a bad place to be. But if you're prepared for war in your flower garden, then if the war comes, that's a better place to be. So how do we decide what to do, what strategies to have for us to stay, for us to remain anchored, for us to be safe when we are going to encounter the inevitable storms of life? You know, boats don't sink because they're in the water. Boats don't sink because they're in the water. Boats sink when water gets into them. See, boats are designed to be in the water. You're designed to be in the world, but not of the world. You're designed to, as you are going about, make disciples. You're supposed to be light in the darkness. You're supposed to be salt in the world. You can't be self-contained and be effective. So you're not going to sink because you're in the world. The problem comes when the storm blows and your anchor's not right and the world gets into you. So what are some strategies? What are some thoughts? What are some tools to help us stay? Look at the book of Hebrews. In Hebrews chapter 12, you're going to get almost a concluding statement where the author there is trying to convince his people, do not forsake Christianity and go back into Judaism. Now, if you read from start to finish in Hebrews, you're going to find this beautifully laid out argument that Christ is superior to the Mosaical covenant in every single way. That Christ was superior in his message, Christ was superior in his priesthood, Christ is superior in the sacrifice, Christ is superior because he's got an advocate with the Father. There's this beautifully laid out message that Christ was superior to the old covenant. And it's interesting that when the Hebrew writer talks about the old covenant, He doesn't talk about Herod's temple. He doesn't talk about Ezra's temple. He doesn't talk about Solomon's temple. He talks about the tabernacle. In the first century, what they were doing for Judaism probably wasn't really Judaism. See, read the New Testament and see how many references you come up with to the phrase Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement. So you hear Passover, 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 Passover. John the Baptizer will say, there's the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. That's a Yom Kippur statement. And then you'll find the atoning sacrifice mentioned in 1 John, and you'll find it talked about in Hebrews. You see, on the Day of Atonement, the priest would take the blood of the sacrifice, and he would go into the holy place, and he would sprinkle the blood on the mercy seat. They hadn't had a mercy seat in 600 years. When Solomon's temple was destroyed, the Ark of the Covenant vanished. And Jeremiah 3:16 says, you'll never have another ark. You won't talk about the ark. You'll never build another one. They could not do covenant Judaism in the New Testament because they couldn't do the Yom Kippur. They couldn't do the Day of Atonement. When Jesus came and died, he became the atoning sacrifice. He became the Passover lamb. He was superior to everything in the Old Testament. And yet these people, because they were suffering persecution, were leaving Christianity and going back to this temple thing. And the Hebrew writer's begging them not to leave. He's begging them literally to stay. And the big thing that he's talking about, he's going to talk about the people of faith stayed. But it's interesting when he talks about the people of faith. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, now that's a transitional statement. He's told you some things that are true, and now he's going to transition to things that if these things are true, then these things should happen. Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, he brings in the past. He says, I want you to understand that what we just talked about should have a bearing on your decision-making process. What we just talked about is all these people who were before you, and this word witnesses is not like spectators. It's not like being at a ball game or at the arena. Witnesses there means martyrs. You are surrounded by a great crowd, a great cloud of martyrs. People who have the same faith you have, but didn't quit. They chose to stay. And if you decide that you're going to quit, if you decide you're going to become unfaithful, if you decide you're going to buy into the lies of the world, picture walking through this crowd. And let's say that I just picked this center section and decided I had to walk through them. And I had to explain to a person who was fed to lions, or a person who was burned at the stake, or a person who was beheaded, or a person who had all their property. Look, they're making fun of me at school. I can't stay. I have to quit. He said, you walk through this crowd. You walk through this group of people who died for what they believe, and you explain to them why you can't stay. He starts off with a super powerful punch. It's interesting when you think about the Hebrews 11 crowd. Let's just read the last part of Hebrews 11, that roll call of faith. Hebrews 11:32. Now what shall I say? Time would fail me to tell you of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel and the prophets. Now listen to what these guys did. Who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of aliens, and women received their dead raised to life again. This is comic book superhero stuff. This stuff happened in real life. They fought lions, they survived fires, they took one man and chased off an entire army of alien invaders. They escaped the fire and they escaped the sword, they subdued kingdoms, they obtained. You could read this, if you could choose to watch this happen in real life or watch an Avengers movie, you'd go to sleep in the Avengers movie. This is real life superhero stuff. And it actually happened. And these people of faith did this stuff. But now the interesting part of Hebrews 11 is keep reading. Verse 35, women received their dead raised to life again. Others, not the superhero crowd, but others were tortured. And they did not accept deliverance that they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trial of mockings and scourgings and chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were cut in half. They were tempted. They were slain with the sword. They wandered around in sheepskins and goatskins. They were destitute, afflicted, and tormented. This world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains and dens and in caves. See, you have people with faith. And one group of people subdued kingdoms and conquered lions and conquered the sword and chased armies of aliens away and had the dead raised back to life. And another group of people were murdered and tortured and confined and imprisoned. And all of those people, the superhero endings and these tragic endings, all of them had the same faith. Please listen to what the Hebrew writer says. Your faith does not affect your circumstances. Just because you have faith doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Just because you have faith doesn't mean it's going to be fun. Just because you have faith doesn't mean it's not going to be scary. Your faith does not affect your circumstances. The point he's making is, don't let your circumstances affect your faith. You have these people who have these great endings that you make movies about, and then you had this same group of people who died and were tortured and were cut in half and were killed with the sword. Therefore, since you're surrounded by this cloud, since you've got these people, don't you quit. Don't you give up. Don't you run away. Don't you become discouraged. In fact, the first thing to guarantee that we're prepared for the storm is going to be about inventory. Therefore, since we are surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses, inventory item number one is the endurance, the race that is set before us. He says the first thing you got to do is look at your life. If you want to guarantee that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 30 years from now, you're still going to be a Christian, you got to ask yourself some questions. And he says, you basically look at it like this. You're a runner. And you got to take inventory about your run. He says, you look at your life as a run, and then you ask yourself, are there some things here that are hindering me, that are entangled? Literally what he's saying here is take your clothes off and run. Now, we're not going to do that. Okay, we're going to keep our mask on. We're going to keep our clothes on. But that's literally what he was telling them to do, because you couldn't run in a robe. He said, if you decided to run a sprint, you take that long flowing robe off and you run with the least amount on you could run in. That's literally what he's saying. But in our language, it would be, look at the things we're trying to drag with us. Now, let's do a little thought exercise. There's some ambient light, so don't be afraid to raise your hand. I can see you. Let's suppose that we could go out here and mark off a 100-yard dash. And let's say that we would run a foot race. And the winner of the foot race, whoever runs across the line first in a 100-yard dash, lives forever. Okay? It's a race. It's a pretty big race. You run 100 yards, the first guy to cross the finish line lives forever. Anybody here think you could outrun me in 100 yards? Don't be afraid. Raise your hand. I can take it. I'm 5'4". If my legs were any shorter, they wouldn't reach the ground. So you think you could outrun me in 100 yards? Okay, that's fair. You're half my age, twice my height. You should be able to outrun me. So here's the deal. We're going to run this race. We're going to do this 100-yard dash, and we're going to run this race, and the winner lives forever. I'm going to give you $1 million. I'm going to convert that to quarters. That's 4 million quarters for you math guys. That weighs 1,100 pounds. And I'm going to give it to you in a backpack. If you can beat me running that race, carrying the backpack, you get to keep the money. Anybody here foolish enough to think you can outrun me dragging 1,100 pounds with you? So now, you've got a choice to make. You can run with the money or run without the money. What are you going to do? Oh, that's almost stupid simple. I'm not going to run with the money. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'll give you any car you want. A Ferrari, a Lamborghini, a Ferrari-Ghini. We'll combine the two. You put it in neutral. You put a shoulder harness on, and you drag that car. And if you can outrun me dragging that car, you get to keep the car. Anybody in here foolish enough to think you can outrun me dragging a car? You can't. Oh, pretty simple. You can run with the car or run without the car. What are you going to live forever? I think I'll leave the car. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'll give you any boyfriend, girlfriend you want. We'll do the weird science thing. Make your own. Create your ideal person. Okay? But this perfect boyfriend or perfect girlfriend, you've got to carry as you race. Nobody in this room outrun me carrying another person. Now, just for free, you find somebody that'll run that race with you, that's money. But you can't win that race carrying another person. You want a partner, not a project when you date. Ladies, if you got to have somebody you got to pet and nurture, get a puppy. You want to date and marry a man, somebody you respect. But there's nobody in this room can outrun. And we can spend the rest of the night talking about, okay, let's talk about, can you outrun me with this attitude? Can you outrun me with this hobby? And all you would do is look and say, this helps my run, this hurts my run. If this is hurting my run, I'm going to get rid of it. That's so easy. The reason some of us will not survive, the reason we will not stay in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, or the next 15 years, is there's an inventory in our lives that we've got friends, we've got hobbies, we've got attitudes, we've got habits, we've got practices that if we don't get rid of when the storm hits us, we're sunk. Because even though you think you're competitive in that run, dragging a money bag, dragging a car, carrying somebody else, you're not. And it's foolishness to think that you are. So you remember that there are people who went before you who didn't quit. Number two, you take a very serious look at what do I have in my life. And I've got to make some tough choices. Some of the things that I've got to get rid of are hurtful. Some of the things I've got to say goodbye to. It may be your major in school. It may be your career path. It may be the person you're dating right now. It may be your best friend. It may be your best buddy. There's all kinds of things when you start looking and saying, hey, if I run this race, does this help my run or hurt my run? Now, when you have to make tough choices, notice this. Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin that easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is now set down at the right hand of the throne of God. He said, some of the decisions that you make hurt. Sometimes when you take an inventory and you say, I've got to get rid of this or I've got to lose this, man, that's hard. Girls, it's not difficult to break up with a dude who's a jerk. Loser, gone, done. Okay? Not a problem. It's when he's a wonderful, sweet, handsome, courteous guy and you love him, but he's not going to get you to heaven. That's the hardest choice you'll ever make. Guys, and let's just face it, everybody in this room is married. We outkicked our coverage. Okay, we married somebody prettier than we should have, smarter than we are, got no reason to be married to us, but they did anyway. They had a moment of insanity. Bam, we got them. If she's the beautiful princess, but she won't help you get to heaven, what good does it do you? Some of the decisions that we make are going to be hard. How do you deal with pain? Well, you deal with pain through this idea called endurance. You run a race with endurance. I've got a little buddy named Wesley Widener. He comes over to my house on Thursdays, and we practice jiu-jitsu. I'm teaching him some things in the gentle art. He decided to raise money for a cancer foundation, and he ran 2 miles every hour for 12 hours to raise money for this cancer foundation. And to warm up for it, he started over here at Goldsmith Schiffman, ran all the way over Cecil Ashburn to Mellow Mushroom and ran back. Just ran 22 miles one afternoon just because he could. He said he hurt, but he didn't let the pain shut him down. That's what endurance is. Endurance runners don't run and not feel any pain. Endurance runners run even though there is pain. How do you deal with the pain of some of these choices? Well, you have this example. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Basically says Jesus is the architect. He drew the plan, and then he built the building, the author and finisher of our faith. Now, how is Jesus the author and finisher of our faith? Because of this episode right here, who for the joy set before him endured the cross and despised the shame and is at the right hand of God. When Jesus was being crucified, when a minimum wage paid Roman soldier knelt and put his knee in the eye of the elbow and flattened his fingers out, and a guy placed that spike in his wrist, and another guy raised that 8-pound hammer and slammed it down. Jesus had 72,000 angels standing on their tiptoes at the brink of heaven. Get on YouTube and look up the Stay series. SWAT did a little mini series, the drama guys, and there's a skit about those angels. You'll enjoy that. Jesus did not look at the spikes in his hands, or the whip marks on his back, or the thorns in his head. He didn't look at what was happening now. He looked at what God had promised him later. Who for the joy set before him endured the cross and despised the shame. The ability to stay boils down to this decision. What do you want now versus what do you want most? And when you can choose between what you want most and forsake what you want now, you'll never quit, you'll never give up, you'll never stop. People who quit, people who stop, and people who give up, people who don't stay, always get suckered in and they choose the now rather than the most. And when you can keep your eyes focused on what do I want most, when you figure out what you want most, that's how you have the ability to stay. My wife and I have a wonderful marriage. We've been married 36 years on Tuesday. This year, her Christmas present cost $4.97. You say, how did you stay married that long with that kind? I bought a journal in the airport. I was flying out of someplace in January, and every day this year, I wrote down something about her that I loved. And I gave it to her and said, I think about you every day, and I love you every day. We've had a difficult year. We've lost some business. We've lost some work, schools of chaos. And even on the days when I wasn't in the very best mood, when I sat down and had to remember this is what I want most, I want to find out something I love about my wife. What I want most versus what it felt like right now was inconsequential. When you start making choices, what you want most over what you want now. Now, the next section here, he talks about this. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. He says, if you look at Jesus and what he did and how he did it, you've got no excuse for not staying. You look at what Jesus did and you say, you know, when I think about what I'm going through, when I think about my circumstances, remember, your faith doesn't control your circumstances don't control your faith either. But when I think about what's happening, I look at Jesus. What did Jesus do? When he was being nailed to a cross, he thought about a promise God had given him. What do I want most, not what do I want now? So you think about him and you won't get discouraged and weary in your souls. He said, but you have not resisted the bloodshed yet, striving against sin. He said, I know it's tough and I know it feels hard, but let's face it, people, you hadn't bled yet. When you start bleeding, it's real serious. And folks, the worst persecution we've ever had as Americans, we hadn't bled yet. I'm not saying we won't. I'm not saying the time's not coming when that might be on the option. But right now, you think about the circumstances that you're enduring and the things that make it tough to be a Christian and the excuses we'll make for quitting or not staying. The bottom line is you haven't bled yet. And really, until you start bleeding, it's not that serious. We used to play basketball, no blood, no foul. I'm not a very good basketball player. My number in basketball is 5. That stands for the number of fouls I get. If you have any fouls left on the last great day, you are wrong. But if it's not bleeding, it's not serious. And the Hebrew writer says, listen, when you think about quitting and you think how hard, look, you're not bleeding yet. So don't get discouraged, don't get weary. And then he takes this next section when he talks about, you know, you really hadn't really suffered that much. And he uses from, say, about verse 7 all the way down through about verse 11, and he makes this comparison. He says, you have to view suffering or difficulty the same way you view discipline. Now, he's not talking about this is how a dad should discipline, or this is how God disciplines people. But he says when God allows us to suffer, if we change our mindset, we understand that suffering should be viewed the same way as discipline. And the root word for discipline or disciple is training. Any of you ever do any training for football, basketball, cheerleading, band? Yeah, what happens? You do things that are difficult. And when you endure those things that are difficult, they make you better, faster, and stronger. He says, anytime you go through a tribulation, anytime you endure difficult circumstances, don't think of it in terms as I'm being punished. Think of it in terms as it's just like discipline from a parent that makes us better. All suffering involves discipline. And you take the reverse of that, every discipline involves suffering. If you're going to be good at anything, you got to pay the price. If you're going to be good at anything, you've got to endure some hardships. If you're going to be good at anything, you've got to build up the endurance to do that. Mark Plemons is a friend of mine. He's works with the Secret Service, and he says the only way to run faster is to run faster. Now, I've got a comfortable pace. I like to run. Well, you start getting me out of that comfort zone, oh man, that hurts. Makes my lungs hurt, makes my legs hurt. I've never had a runner's high. I think it's oxygen deprivation. But you've got, in order to get good at anything, you don't lift the same amount of weight every time. You max out, you do plus twos. You don't just drop and do 50 push-ups every morning. You do 50, then you do 55, then you do 70, then you do 100, then you do 150. Then you have to start adding rings in your garage so they're harder to do. You got to do all kind of stuff because suffering includes discipline, and anything that is a discipline, any form of training includes suffering. So when the Hebrew writer says, I want to prepare you for when the storm comes, there's people who've been through worse storms than you, and they didn't quit. You got to take an inventory. Does this help me run, or does this hurt my run? When it does hurt, look at how Jesus dealt with his hurt. He endured the cross and mocked the shame because he looked at what God had promised him would happen later, and he didn't focus on what was happening right now. He said, remember, you hadn't suffered to blood yet. And then he says, you've got to focus on the fact that suffering is discipline, and anything that requires discipline is also going to require suffering. And then in verse 12, he moves on and says, therefore, strengthen the hands that hang down and the feeble knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather healed. It took me a long time to figure this one out. He's talking about all these things about preparation. And then he starts talking about hands that hang down and feeble knees and feet that are lame so they don't become crippled. What he's saying, understand, acknowledge, and be honest about your weaknesses. We tend to stay within our comfort zone. We tend to only do the things that we're really, really comfortable doing, and the things that we're really not good at, we kind of stay away from. He says, look, you got to understand, you got to be self-aware, not self-absorbed. Don't ever say, well, that's just the way I've always been. What that means is you act a certain way and you don't understand why. Well, you need to understand why. I need to change it. Because if we just accept the fact that, oh, that's just the way I am, then we have this get-out-of-jail-free excuse for never making our lives any better. We never focus on the things that really need to be addressed. When I first started trying to climb, and please understand, I'm not a good climber. I like to climb. When I started climbing as a kid, it was all power climbing. We didn't have special shoes. I didn't even wear special climbing shoes till I was 30. And most of the teenagers in this room could out-climb me, but I still like to climb. But when I first started climbing, I thought it was a power game, and so I tried to do pull-ups. Hung a fingerboard in the garage, had pull-up bars, had straps hanging down from the ceilings, and I thought if you could do 10 pull-ups, you were a good climber. If you could do 15 pull-ups, you were a better climber, and if you could maybe do 20 or 25 pull-ups, you might be Spider-Man. And so, buddy, I was knocking those pull-ups out. Well, when I was 30, I'm 57 now, so it's been a day or two ago, I was in North Carolina climbing with a guy on Table Rock, and we were going to do a couple of days of warm-ups and some rescues in case we got into deep water, because we're going to do a 5-pitch climb. And as we were getting ready to do this climb, he said, Lonnie, I want you to try to climb this little thing. And it's a little 45-foot thing in the chimneys area. And it's basically a rock ladder, but, 45 feet. And he said, but I want you to climb it with a blindfold. I was like, who are you, Obi-Wan Kenobi? I'm not going to wear a blindfold. But he stuck this blindfold on me, and instead of reaching up and grabbing the rock and pulling myself up, I grabbed the rock, and naturally my foot came up. And the best climbers in the world don't pull themselves up rock. They push with their feet. They stand in a straight line with all their weight bearing on their bones. The shoes they wear look like ballet slippers, because you do not conquer a rock, you dance with it. And it's a finesse thing, not a power thing. And the best climbers in the world use their feet. I got off that rock after having climbed it with a blindfold on, and the guy, Doc Klein, says, Lonnie, what I noticed about your climbing is you reach up as high as you can reach, which is not very high, and you grab this big hold of this rock, and you pull on it, and if the rock doesn't come down, you go up. It's just a terrible way to climb. It burns a lot of energy. But once you start using your feet and learn to stand on the rock, you'll be better. And I was going to quit at 30. I was going to go out to Table Rock. I was going to do a multi-pitch climb, and I wasn't going to climb anymore. I came home on my 30th birthday, bought a pair of climbing shoes, and I'm still climbing. Why? Because I learned to address my weaknesses. I'm not a very graceful person. I'm not a person of balance or finesse. But this guy taught me to address those weaknesses. Look at what you're addressing. Look at what you're dodging. Look at what you're not doing. Look at what you're not paying attention to. And you may find out, hey, this is an area that if I could fix right now, when I encounter a storm, my anchor won't fail and I'll stay. And then the last warning that we have time for comes in this last verse. Verse 15, looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled, lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright. And you know that afterward, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought it diligently and with tears. See, at the end of this discussion about how to stay, he talks about Esau. And when he talks about Esau, he reviews a story that everybody's supposed to know. Make sure that you know the story. Esau's coming in from hunting. His little brother, Jacob, is cooking a stew. As Esau's coming in from hunting, the Bible says he was weary, he was tired, he was famished, he was faint, or he was exhausted, depending on the translation you read. And when he sees this soup that his brother's cooking, he says, hey, let me have some of your soup because and he uses the exact same word. He uses in his statement the same word the writer used to describe him. He's weary, tired, faint, famished, or exhausted. And when he says, hey, let me have some of your soup, his brother says, okay, you can have some soup if you'll give me your birthright. Now, I don't know if his brother was that much of a con man or if he gave him a walk-away price. A walk-away price is when you tell somebody you'll do something, but you really don't want to do it, so you charge them so high they leave you alone. We needed a door replaced at our house. I do some carpentry work. I build some things, but we had this door with these two double-side panels. It was too big of an opening right there at the hardwood floor, and I didn't think I had the skill set to do it. So we're looking for a carpenter. My wife's standing in the car rider line one day, getting kids gone, and she said, there's this pickup truck with a carpenter sign, a construction sign, general contractor. She said, I got the number. Why don't you email this guy and see if he'll do our door? So I sent this guy a text and said, hey, got your number, and would you do a door with two side panels, and these are the dimensions? And he sends back, I didn't know he was a commercial contractor. He wasn't a residential contractor. This guy does big projects. So he sends this quote back, and listen, he was proud of that door. I mean, it was unbelievable what he wanted to fix a door. So I thought, okay, that's a walk-away price. He didn't want to fix my door, so I didn't do anything. 2 weeks later, he sends me a note. Hey, did you get the price for the door? I said, yes, we decided to use the money to send my wife back to college and earn a degree in carpentry and let her fix her own door. That's how much, goodness. So Jacob looks at his brother and says, yeah, you can have my soup, but let me have your birthright. The first thing that happens in emotion-based thinking, the reason we don't stay is we get wrapped up in our emotions. The first thing that happens is we do all or nothing thinking. If I can't have that, I can't have anything. If I'm not the best, I'm the worst. If I'm not perfect, I failed. If I can't do it all, I can't do any. Esau looks at this one bowl of soup and says, if I don't have that, and how many marriages have failed because somebody said, if I don't text that person? How many times you've broken trust with your parents? You said, if I can't be with that boy or that girl. How many times have you decided that I have to look at this on the internet to be satisfied? How many times have we taken the one thing that we can't have and give up everything that we do have? By the way, is soup the only thing to eat in this camp? Esau's grandfather is Abraham. Abraham was not a homeless dude that lived under a bridge in Palestine. Abraham had an army of 300 men raised and trained in his own household. If you've got an army, you've got groceries. If this kid had taken his eyes off the soup and just done this, he'd have seen figs and pomegranates and servants and turtle doves. You couldn't swing a shovel in this camp and not hit a sheep. Yet this guy thinks if I don't get this bowl of soup, he says, if I don't get this, I'm going to die. What good is my birthright? How many times have we been talked into not staying because of the oldest trick in the book? The oldest trick in the book, Satan asked Eve, what can't you eat? Not what can you eat, what can't you eat? And when she focused on the one thing she couldn't have, she took it. Esau's looking at the one thing he looks at the one thing he can't have rather than everything that his father has promised him. And then he talked himself into this deal and says, you can't give your birthright away. That's not really a thing. Because when it comes time to get the blessing, he's in line thinking he's going to get it. And when his father gives it to his little brother, there's nothing he can do about it. You don't get a do-over. You don't respawn. It's over. And so Esau stands here, convinces himself that hungry now means I'm starving. And how many times have we been, I'm nervous, so I've got anxiety. I'm a little bit sad, so I've got depression. Somebody was mean to me, everybody's a bully. I don't really feel comfortable, so I don't fit in. How many times have we lied to ourselves and decided not to stay just because we had this tweak in our emotions? He goes from I'm hungry to I'm starving to death. He focuses on a bowl of red soup, the one thing he can't have, and forgets the inheritance that his father promised him. And he makes a temporary decision that has permanent consequences. And if we end up 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, and we didn't stay, I guarantee you, if you look back at your life, you'll find a place where you're self-absorbed, not self-aware. You'll find a place where you decided to take the thing that you want now, and you gave away the thing that you thought was the most important, but I can't lose it over that. Yeah, you can. Oh, that won't, yeah, it will. And a decision you make right now as a teenager to study, to pray, to worship, to fellowship, who to date, what to study, what to major in, where to go to college, those decisions will have echoes for the rest of your lives. And those decisions don't even involve right and wrong. Those decisions involve smart and dumb. But just think about when you compromise on a right and wrong decision. Because at some point you see the light. At some point you recognize the water's getting in the boat. At some point you recognize I'm not sinking because I'm in the water. I'm sinking because the water got into me. And then you know that afterward, later on, the consequences come home. Later on, he wanted to inherit the blessing. The promise that my father had said was mine from the day I was born. But he was rejected, for he found no place to change his mind, even though he sought it diligently and with tears. The decision to stay or not to stay doesn't happen 15 years from now when you wake up and go, I just quit. The decision to stay or not to stay is based on preparation. What's in your inventory? How do you handle painful decisions? Do you choose between what I want now and what I want most? Do I understand that there are people before me who suffered and didn't quit? And do I understand that discipline and suffering go hand in hand? And am I willing to work on my weaknesses? And then after I address my weaknesses, am I really willing to look at, am I making a choice? Am I trading what I want most to get what I want now? And you'll find out that if you end up in a place where you didn't stay, it'll come down to a minor moment that you didn't think was significant, but had echoes into your eternity. It's not just whether or not you make a big decision. It's the little decisions. Basketball games aren't won on Thursday nights on hardwood floors. Basketball games are won on Monday mornings in a concrete driveway shooting free throws. Football games aren't won on Friday nights under stadium lights. They're won on Monday mornings in August when it's 110 degrees in the shade and you're doing two-a-days. Every major decision that you're going to make in your life is won or lost, not in the moment of the decision, but it's the decision of where did I place my anchor, what did I do with my rope, and did I anticipate calm water or did I anticipate stormy water? The decision for the rest of eternity is made in your preparation for the future storm. Make a decision tonight. If you've made an Esau decision, if you tried to run with the wrong thing, as we sing this song tonight, look at your youth minister, look with your group, sit down in your place and say, look, I'm going to put some things down. I'm going to throw some things away. I'm going to decide I'm going to choose most over now. And let us help you make a decision so that when these decisions are made, having done all, you'll be able to say, I decided to stay. Let's make those choices. We'll stand and sing to encourage you. Let's sing now.